Max Chandler-Mather, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get to what you're demanding in these negotiations, what do you think of the policy idea itself? Would this help to buy scheme actually make things better or worse for those trying to get into the market?
Well, the government scheme would only help 0.2% of renters buy a home every year, and for the other 99.8% of renters in this country, it will actually drive up prices. It will have an inflationary impact. Because imagine you're at an auction and one person has access to this scheme, and the 99.8% who don't, they'll watch that person bid up the price of housing because they have more money from the government in their pocket, and it screws over the vast majority of people. And frankly, I don't think Australians should have to win this bizarre lottery where you've got a 0.2% chance of winning just to get an affordable home, especially when there are solutions we can pursue, like tackling the big tax handouts for property investors, like capping rent increases, like building public housing that have worked in this country before to actually make housing affordable for every Australian.
And I'll come to some of those ideas and the argument you've made that this will be inflationary. But just to pick up on what you just said, if you really think this is going to, in your words, screw over the vast majority, surely there's no way you're ever going to vote for this, right? Are you really having a negotiation, or if you think it's going to screw people over, you're never going to vote for it, are you?
No, there's a possibility for that. Last year we
You'd
had
vote
some
for something that screws people over?
Well, no, and there'll be a broad net positive if we can negotiate a phase out of tax handouts for property investors, get a cap on rent increases and build public housing. Taken as a whole, that would have an enormous beneficial impact. And of course, the Greens recognise we can't get everything we want, and if we have to negotiate with the government to get through their little scheme that will have an inflationary impact on house prices, but on the other hand, we can get through changes to capital gains tax concessions and negative gearing, then overall that would be a good thing.
Okay, so we'll come to those in a tick. But again, you've said this is going to be inflationary. Just to challenge that, the Grattan Institute says the scheme would help young Australians get into the market. Also, many older women get into the market as well. It says there would only be a modest impact on housing values. A number of other economists as well. So you're talking about a pretty minimal impact. 10,000 homes a year out of, what is it, something like 500,000 houses sold each year?
Well, even a modest impact is going to have a negative impact on people trying to buy a home, where it's already the case that millions of people are basically giving up on ever being able to buy a home. We saw the New South Wales Productivity Commission say that Sydney could become a city without grandchildren. That's how bad this crisis is. So, of course, in a situation where the government bowls up a bill where every mainstream economist said it will at least have some inflationary impact on house prices, we're going to go back to the government and say, hang on, this is the worst housing crisis we've faced in generations. Surely this can't be your only policy this year to deal with it.
But are you saying it's a modest inflationary impact, I think you just said then, or are you saying it screws people over when it comes to the inflationary impact?
Well, the point I'm making is that any extra inflationary impact on house prices is going to hurt people trying to buy a home and renters trying to buy a home. Imagine, let's break this down then. The government is coming to the Parliament with a policy that every mainstream economist said will have some upward impact on house prices in the middle of one of the worst housing crises we've faced in generations. I don't think, taken as on its own, that's a good idea.
Doesn't sound like you'll vote for it ever.
Well, I think that will be entirely determined based on the negotiations with the government and whether or not we can secure some actual substantial shifts on the big tax handouts for property investors and capping rent increases.
Okay, so what exactly do you want when it comes to negative gearing and capital gains tax breaks? Do you want them gone or just reduced? What's your actual position?
Well, we don't want to prejudice negotiations. We've said we want them phased out in some form. Our 2022 election policy was to get rid of negative gearing for everyone going forward and grandfather it down to one investment property for those who do have one, and completely getting rid of the 50% discount on the capital gains tax discount. And for your listeners,
sorry to jump in there, just on negative gearing, just to explain what your position at the election was. It's to grandfather existing arrangements, but only allow one property to be negatively geared?
That's correct. And then for everyone else, phase it out over 5 years. Now, this would raise billions of dollars that we could invest in building and public housing. And I think that a lot of people out there agree that we're better off spending billions of dollars building public housing than giving tax handouts to people with 5, 10, 20 investment properties that mean it's easier for someone to buy their 10th investment property and harder for someone to buy their first.
So just sticking with what your policy at the moment is, if you currently own multiple properties like some of your Greens colleagues, Nick McKim, Marine Faruqi, they own I think 4, they would have to sell those and only hold 1?
No, not sell them. They just wouldn't get access to negative gearing.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So they would lose their tax break. Your colleagues would lose their tax break and they'd just have one negatively geared property.
And I'm glad you brought that up, David, because that's the point we made in Parliament this week, that it's remarkable that we have a property investor Prime Minister and a Labor caucus where 75% of their parliamentarians own investment properties and they are opposing any changes to tax handouts for property investors. I'm proud of the fact that every colleague in the Greens party room is fully prepared tomorrow, wherever we get a chance, to vote to phase out those tax handouts. And I think part of the reason
you're still going to let them keep some of their investment properties.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, look, the context of this political debate is we're trying to bowl up a proposal that could generate broad public support. And I think too often, it's funny because often the Greens are accused of going too far, and perhaps the implication in your question is that maybe we could go further. I'm always happy to have a debate about that.
No, I'm just pointing out that you're claiming purity on the part of the Greens, but you're not actually getting rid of the property investments that some of your colleagues still hold. Look, just on negative gearing and what impact it has on rents, do you agree that the whole principle is you can make a loss? That's the point of negative gearing. That does keep some downward pressure on rents. Do you accept that argument?
No, I don't at all. And for 2 reasons. One, we saw the Grattan Institute report on impacts of phasing out negative gearing say there would be no impact on rents. There may actually be downward pressure on rents because one of the things these tax handouts in combination have done, including the capital gains tax discount, is deprive a lot of renters the chance to buy a home. So when Howard introduced that capital gains tax discount, there was about 26% renters in this country and now there's 30%. Now, if those changes hadn't happened, we'd have an extra 400,000 renters who could have bought a home, taking a lot of pressure off the rental market. The perfect storm we have in the rental market at the moment is precisely because the government are supporting policies that prevent renters from ever being able to buy a home and allowing investors to buy homes instead.
Most economists, again, say there would be an immediate jump in rents, though. Over the longer term, you might get what you're talking about. What are you relying on here, and when do you think you would see rents eventually come down?
Well, I disagree, David. That's not most economists. And we know that when negative gearing was briefly phased out in the 80s in Australia, actually rents, for instance, in Brisbane went down. And in Adelaide, they went down a little bit as well. What these tax handouts do is encourage massive speculation in the property market. Last year in December, there was almost twice as many purchases of investor properties as there were first home buyer purchases. What that means is you have a market geared towards generating a lot of money for people with a lot of investment properties. And in combination with introducing a nationally coordinated cap on rent increases, what you'd see is more renters exiting the rental market as they're able to buy a home for the first time in their lives. A lot of people have given up on that. While if they're in the rental market, what you'll see is caps and limits on rent increases, or at the very least, even if you don't get that, you'll have them competing with less renters because for the first time, a lot more will be able to buy a home.
The Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy gave evidence this week at a Senate hearing. He was talking about the main problem in the housing market being constraints around supply and faster than anticipated population growth. I'll come to population, but on supply, do you support generally higher density in our big cities to boost supply?
Good medium density is good, but I'll just quickly note on supply, the implication always in that argument is we somehow need to relax the rules for property developers. Look, property developers, as long as they're in charge of supplying housing, will only ever supply housing at a rate that generates them a profit and sees house prices continue to go up. We know this because over the last 20 years, basically property developers have got whatever they want. Now, if we want to deal with this issue, then the government should start building public housing at a scale that they used to. In the 20th century, it used to be 30% at some points of all all construction was of good public housing for workers. And on the other end, on the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing, what we're seeing is property investors hoard homes that could go to first home buyers. Over 80% of all property investor purchases go on existing dwellings. So really what we've got is this perfect storm.
But just back to this issue around higher density. Currently, you've got the New South Wales Premier in a battle with a bunch of mayors in Sydney over his effort to change the zoning laws there. This all goes to more infill, more higher density in Sydney. Whose side are you on this one?
Well, that won't change a thing, because what we know right now is the planning system is not the barrier to fixing the housing crisis. So the latest data suggests that there are a record number of approved developments in Australia that developers are not building. And what that means actually is that developers are either sitting on that land because they don't want to build until it's profitable to do so. Maybe they're waiting until it's a bit easier for them to build. So really changing the planning system, all that does is put money in the pockets of property developers, because when you rezone land, it drives up the price of that land and puts more money in the pocket of developers. Again, if you want to fix the housing crisis, you're much better off building good quality public housing for teachers and workers, not just the worse off, and phasing out those massive tax handouts for property investors that will cost the budget tens of billions of dollars over the next few years.
No, I understand your point on that. Look, on population growth, the other part of this, we saw migration hit a record number last year, 510,000. The government's confident it's going to be able to halve that. What role do you think migration plays when it comes to house prices?
It might have some effect on short-term fluctuations, but I think this debate around migration is a huge distraction, because when we talk about immigrants or migration, we're talking about the nurses, teachers, we're talking about construction workers, the people this country needs. Secondly, we saw during COVID, net migration reached near zero and house prices continue to go up. The major problem with our housing crisis is the fact that property is treated as a massive speculative asset that drives up the price of housing.
But on migration, do the Greens want higher or lower migration?
Look, we just don't think that migration is a major cause of the housing crisis. And
major,
look,
but you did say a component though, didn't you?
Well, might be short-term fluctuations, but again, let's be very clear that what we know is that there were 1 million vacant properties on the night of the census in 2021. A million vacant properties. I just want to be very clear. We have enough homes for people to live in. We have enough construction materials to build the homes for the new people coming to this country. What we don't have is the political will to take on a housing system that will on property developers who constrict supply to make money for themselves and treats housing as a huge speculative asset.
So I'm not sure I got an answer though on whether you'd like higher or lower migration.
Well, we'll take a policy to the next election.
You must have an idea, though.
The country should be.
You've thought a lot about this space. Would you like more or less migration?
Well, we've said, again, that we'd like to see a big increase in the number of refugees that this country is taking. Again, I just think this is we're happy to take a policy to the next election on this, and certainly in the past we've taken policies that increase our refugee intake. But again, this is not the cause of the housing crisis. To give you
it's a concern for a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with that. You're just not sure at the moment whether it should be a higher or lower intake?
Well, in general, I think more people coming to this country is a good thing, because we are desperately short of healthcare workers, we're desperately short of construction workers, we're desperately short of the people we need to make this country work, aged care as well. And again, I can't emphasise this enough. House prices will keep going up, rents will keep going up unless we put limits on rent increases and we deal with the massive tax handouts for property investors that are screwing over millions of people trying to buy a home.
Yeah, okay. Just a quick one finally. Issues of alcohol in the building at Parliament House. Been a lot of focus on this over the last couple of weeks. Where do the Greens stand on these ideas about either banning alcohol in the building or even alcohol and drug testing members of Parliament? What do you think?
Well, look, I mean, I think people justifiably expect a high standard for politicians that they don't always deliver on. Look, personally, in general, I don't think drug test and alcohol testing in any workplace is necessarily a good idea, but certainly I think people are justifiably upset at the standard politicians hold themselves to.
All right. Max Chandler-Mather, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.